This week, you headed out to Silicon Valley. I stayed behind to work on policy to ensure that America can always lead on autonomy, usher in the autonomy economy, and hopefully we can get a autonomous vehicle framework by the end of the year. Elon goes on CNBC, talks about robotaxis, the hype's building. Secretary Duffy joined him at Giga this week, talking about robotaxis, and most importantly, for me and you, they talked about a national framework. And then the China Bulls, they got a dose of reality this week. In Beijing, a pony AI car blew up, caught on fire on the roads. The Chinese government, the heavy totalitarian government, they put a kibosh to it. But Walt, let's start with your trip to the Valley. What did you learn? What did you learn?
First of all, I think the improvements in San Francisco in terms of the cleanliness under the mayor is notable. So congrats there. The city looked great. The Valley looked great in general, and the optimism there. And I've said this over many episodes of our podcast. Just these are the smartest people, in our society that are pursuing this problem. So it was a very encouraging trip to be sure. Let's start, I think, with Tesla. I had an opportunity to ride the new Model Y, and before we get into the autonomy, for anyone considering car purchases out there, I own a current Model Y. This one is so much better in terms of the suspension, the comfort, the quietness. I know we've probably heard this from other people, on the internet thus far, but just my personal experience is it's a great car in terms of the new car. The FSD, this is my first opportunity to be in FSD 13. I think it was 2.6 maybe. I mean, it was equivalent, I think, in some people's experience, perhaps better than what Waymo felt with. I understand that people will note that it's not necessarily about how it feels, but does it maintain your safety, as I think you've kind of highlighted on past episodes, and we can get into that. But it was certainly, I think, a very positive experience, and I think I learned a lot more about what we can expect in the upcoming launch that maybe can dispel some of the incorrect speculation that might be out there.
Before we dive into autonomy, as a Tesla owner, I got a pet peeve with the new Model Y. The column blinker. I don't like it. I liked it on the steering wheel. Did you get used to that?
Yeah, it takes a transition in terms of how you're controlling the car, to be sure. But given that the autonomy starts from a park position, I think just how we're going to integrate or interface with our cars is going to change going forward. And like many things, just like people replicated the large screen in the car, and you see that all over the place, I'm guessing you're going to see others replicate what you're seeing in the Model Y. It was a great car. The biggest thing for me is, I've always complained about the suspension. I was in the back seat, I was in the front seat, but the back seat is the more notable thing. I mean, it just felt smooth compared to getting rattled in my existing Model Y.
FSD is getting very smooth. I use it every day. Frankly, I love it. June's 8 days away. What are you expecting for the initial launch of Robotaxi in Austin?
June is 8 days away. It's also, 38 days, until the end of June, until July 1st. So I think there's a bit of over-focus on this June 1st date, and I've never had a company refer to any type of launch date and someone expect something to happen on June 1st. And I certainly don't expect something to happen on June 1st, nor should anyone, I believe, speculate that. In fact, we just had Aurora. We went through the entire month before they actually announced something the day after the last month. And then in terms of what to expect, I think what Elon has talked about in terms of there are people testing in that market in broad areas. But when you first launch, you're going to launch in an area that is a subset of that larger area, which makes sense. That's because there is this, I think, culture of safety. And that's one of the biggest, I think, misperceptions about this company is that this perception that they've just, they throw safety to the wind. There is a culture safety. So clearly you're going to focus on a portion of that footprint where the car is performing well based on the tests that are going on today.
Let's harp on the culture of safety. If you look at all of the crash ratings, the Tesla vehicles are the safest vehicles on the road. And the individuals say that they don't have a culture of safety. It's reckless because there's public data to back it up there. And FSD, in multiple times, has saved multiple lives. It has been proven to be safe. So sorry to the Tesla haters out there. It's been proven to be safe. So we heard this week, Mr. Musk confirmed to David Faber on CNBC, initial launch will be in a limited ODD, 10 to 12 vehicles. We also had a little segment there. They're currently testing them now, drive route with no passenger, limited ODD. How do you see this ODD in the vehicles ramping up over time?
Well, first of all, I don't know if they're driver out on the testing. I didn't catch if Elon said that. I don't think that that's the case. But when they do launch, I think at some point in later in June, with this kind of subset footprint, and with some of these paying customers, then I think we'll get some early signal. I think some people that are always going to have the bias of anti-Elon and Tesla are going to criticize that it's not going to be open where anyone can just log into the app and do it. But I think in the context of within the last few months, people burning Teslas and vandalizing Teslas across the country, it would be absurd for this company to move forward and just let it open on day one at the very start of when there's so much focus on what's going on. These will be external people. They will be paying, in my opinion. And I think we will get signal. And I think certainly there'll be an opportunity, hopefully, to get to Austin soon to test it ourselves and see driver out and see how this is performing. If it feels like the Y that I was in, just this past week, the experience, should be a positive one. Now the question is, can they deliver this service safely? And then how does it expand from there? What's your guess on how big that initial service area is going to be?
My guess on the initial service area will be from Giga probably to the Austin Bergam Airport in that area initially. I'd say for the first week or 2 weeks, then slowly add on a mile, half mile, 2 miles, 3 miles. And Tesla's going to take a very cautious approach to scaling. And to the individuals that say, oh, it's going to be close, I want to point something out to you. When Waymo launches in a new market, initially there's a thing called the trusted tester. Then there was a thing called early rider. Explain to me, write to me, what is the difference between what Tesla's doing and what Waymo's done? It's the exact same thing. So let's get that there for the record.
Yeah, and obviously even in Silicon Valley today, you'd have to get a Waymo code in order to get activated to use Waymo service in that market for a company that everyone thinks has fully solved autonomy. I think as the company progresses, if things go well, they expand. Again, my guess would be by the end of the year, the coverage area of what Tesla will provide in Austin with more cars will probably be equal, if not larger, than what Waymo is delivering in Austin. And then from there, Grayson, it's definitely, well, I don't want to say definitely, it is there's never anything certain in this world, right? It's unlikely that, as some Uber bulls have described, that you're just going to flip a switch and everyone that has hardware 4 and up is going to have autonomy wherever they live. This again, there is a culture of safety at this company. And there will be markets that are similar. There could be clusters of markets that launch at the same time. But the dynamics in New York are very different than Austin, which are very different than San Francisco, which are very different than Chicago. And I think you will see a measured approach in terms of how these products are launched. And then you can obviously add lots of cars, because if in those markets someone has, level 4, or excuse me, hardware 4, then you can have, a rapid expansion, and they can quickly catch up in terms of the number of cars relative to Waymo that are in the market. But I think that's how you should expect, this FSD to kind of roll forward.
They're doing it right. You get some of these maniacs there, they're going to turn a switch on overnight and the whole world's going to do it. No, they're going market by market. Mr. Musk has clearly stated Los Angeles, San Francisco are the next markets. Those are going to come. And he has clearly spoken about, if you want to call it the Airbnb model, where you put your vehicle out, it'll cover your lease payment, your insurance, your charging. We talk a lot about the infrastructure. You want to use the term, go into your world, telco corner, plumbing. How do you see these vehicles getting cleaned? How do you see them getting managed? Because if I put my Tesla out on the network, I don't want to have it come back with puke or a McDonald's bag. How do you see the plumbing working?
You're right. And I think, and we have been early on this, and there has been subsequent dialogue. I think more people are catching on to this as an opportunity. As we all know, Uber and Waymo are using third parties to do this maintenance. In Tesla's case, and again, when we look at some of those third parties, I'll give an example, Terawatt. You talk to Terawatt, who is a Waymo partner. The primary issue for them is finding power and getting power to a location. We've addressed this on past podcasts. What does Tesla do best? The supercharging network far surpasses anyone in the market. So now you're just effectively layering in in many cases, some cleaning capability. So the way this will work is Tesla will own that service layer. And in the future, when you privately own your Tesla and you send it out for, to get some revenue for that privately owned Tesla that you own, it will stop in a Tesla service center and be cleaned, potentially refueled if you want it, repowered, recharged before it returns to your home or whatever location that you may have. So that is the solution. And frankly, it's not like Tesla's starting from ground zero here. If anything, they're a step ahead of where Waymo exists today in terms of the locations that they have with their charger network.
You know what else Tesla has? Robots, which allows them to scale the cleaning. We saw the robot for the Cybercab, the cleaning. They can easily invent and build a robot to clean the Ys, the 3s, the Xs that are going to go on the network. They have the ability to scale. As the Tesla network, the robotaxi network really scales up, gets to, let's call it a pretty dense environment, lots of vehicles on the road, how big of a competitive threat does that really become to Uber?
We'll have to see how that plays out. But I think one component to think about here is I just do not believe that Tesla has any interest in allowing their cars in robotaxi mode to plug into the Uber network. So that is just not going to happen. Now, you could all listen to a podcast that Dara just did on a Decoder where he was asked about this. And Dara's argument is, look, in the future, and Dara believes this now, right? Privately owned autonomous cars will be plugged in or be available for a robotaxi network. And he's like, if there's a Toyota from a deal that Waymo's dealing with Toyota, or maybe Nuro has a deal with another OEM, you're going to leverage it more in our network because we're generating so much demand. His point is that if you're owning a Tesla, the value of that Tesla may be lower because you can only plug it into the Tesla network and not our network where you can get many more rides. I get that argument, and maybe that pressures Tesla in the future to cut a deal with Uber. But in Tesla's viewpoint, within the low cost of their cars and the broad potential volume that's out there, maybe Tesla is going to be generating enough demand on their own, and there's never going to be a need to plug into an existing rideshare partner.
Tesla's going to drive the demand. Point blank. The Model Y is the best-selling vehicle in the world. In that same interview, Dara also said there's 150,000 Teslas on the Uber network, and on the Lyft side of the house, we don't know how many vehicles are on that network. Drivers are freaking out, flipping out. The Model Y is no longer listed as a Comfort Plus vehicle. So it's a lot easier to make it autonomous and put it over there. So the actions that are happening, Tesla's going to be able to drive the demand. And let's not forget the most important aspect of this. Tesla's a brand. I relate them, and they have fans. You could call it very similar to the Grateful Dead. These individuals follow them all over the country, all over the world, go to store openings. That's going to drive demand. Just like when Jerry would get up there with the band, they'd have 60, 70,000 people there. It drives demand.
I mean, the counter argument to that is that brand also evokes hatred in many cases. Although I will say that I believe that if you just go back to auto sales for this company, that sounds like it's more of an issue in Europe. And now that kind of Elon has returned to Tesla, there's not as much noise around Doge, that some of that kind of that noise level is reducing. And more importantly, like the Y, especially the new one, is just a great car and, at a reasonable price. And soon, if they deliver this autonomy, another reason that you should buy that versus other potential cars on the market. Someone cuts a deal with, Tesla or Nuro or someone else today, it's going to take multiple years before you get that level of autonomy in a car versus getting it effectively today in the car that you're purchasing today.
I'll give you another reason why you should buy a Tesla as a Tesla owner. Maintenance costs are zero compared to an internal combustion engine, which would cost you thousands of dollars a year to operate. But what we are seeing now, the robotaxi market is clearly now two leading players. Tesla with this coming launch in Waymo. This week, Waymo had a big week. They got approved from the California Public Utilities Commission, commonly known as the CPUC, where they can now expand down to almost all of San Jose in the South Bay. It's coming closer. They're getting closer to airports. Do you think with this expansion, the next unlock could be the San Jose airport because a little less politics than with SFO?
On my trip to San Francisco, I saw a Waymo on the 101. And, I guess in the meetings that we had and talking to a bunch of people, there is obviously driver testing and driver out testing, I believe, on those highways. I still think what we covered last week, the issue is supply. If you have a bunch of cars in San Francisco and you send them on the 101 headed down to the valley, like you may have a supply issue where it impacts your service in San Francisco. So I think the gating factor at this point, other than the regulatory and getting, places to pick up and drop off, is just the number of cars that they have available in those cities.
There's drone footage from the Mesa, Arizona factory, the Magnus building for them, drone footage on Reddit. 1,800 vehicles were kind of there getting ready to upfit. So more vehicles are coming. Also this week, major milestone for Waymo. They've announced they surpassed 10 million paid rides. I repeat, 10 million paid rides. It's becoming a business.
Yeah, and Dimitri gave a presentation at Google I/O. They really played up, I think, AI, this stuff. They even refer back to that presentation, or excuse me, that white paper that we discussed on Autonomy Markets podcast, right? That was not talked about that much at the time. Great job, Grayson, finding it, highlighting it. It was brought up in this presentation and this kind of shift to, I think, the role that AI has. And that just shows, I think, what happens in terms of development overall. Definitely emphasize private ownership is in the future. It's not just them building their cars, but enabling OEMs, whether it's Toyota or others. So, private ownership, which is something that you've been calling for in the earliest episodes of Autonomy Markets, seems like it's still part of the plan, if not moving to the forefront.
It's moving to the forefront because of the pending launch of Robotaxi. And I own a Tesla, you own a Tesla. Waymo's realizing the market's shifting. Elon called it right again, and they're going to have to move towards private ownership. On the Emma front, if they go to a vision-only system, what Sebastian Thrun spoke about last year at the Applied Intuition Conference in Silicon Valley, that they want to do it, was Elon right again? It's all this all seems like it's coming full circle here.
There was no indication that they would go to vision only. That was clear. I mean, in fact, it was the opposite, that they were playing up the importance of LiDAR. There was demonstrations showed about like a child behind a truck and how LiDAR was actually, they were in the fog and the rain, and you could see in the camera this truck, but didn't see. And then they say, here's what it looks like with LiDAR. And there would be a person that would show up on the screen. So if anything, they're re-emphasizing, and I think trying to point that out as an area of differentiation for the tech media to keep going with this like concept that Tesla can't get there because they're camera only.
To Kedra, the co-CEO of Waymo, went on CNBC and said Teslas can't drive at night. You need LiDAR. That's factually incorrect. Anybody that owns an FSD has used it at night and knows it works. The question that I would love answered, which we do not have any information, how much has Waymo spent on inventing their LiDAR, their proprietary LiDAR system? I like to know that. Is that why they're defending this? Because of the potentially billions they sunk into building this system? Because if you look at the public markets, outside of Hesai, outside of Ouster, the LiDAR market's collapsing.
I'm not going to say the LiDAR market's collapsing, but I will pivot quickly. And I know we're going to get to this later, but we had a great meeting at Nuro, and the tech stack or the hardware, the package that Nuro needs to put on a car is a lot less expensive. And it has, steady state LiDAR as a part of their solution. So while Nuro would also agree with the Waymos of the world that you need LiDAR and that Tesla's approach without LiDAR is doomed to failure. Not that I agree with that, but that is their view. Nuro somewhere in between, where we don't need the most expensive or all these different versions of self-designed LiDAR, that you can use a steady state and get a much cheaper technology stack.
If you look at media, there's 8K, 4K, HD, SD. Perhaps that's how this evolves, depending on what resolution you want at the end of the day.
I'm sure there's a variety of approaches, and for our longtime listeners, I'm cognizant of the fact that when someone insists that a certain approach doesn't work, my radar goes up, and we're open to different technology approach, especially in an era of AI where things are moving very quickly. Even in this Waymo presentation, they were talking about simulations as a part of training their autonomy system and the value of simulations. Again, simulations where people were telling me like, oh God, that they're used to, you only need, the guy that wins has the most actual miles on the road. And now even Waymo is, again, Waymo's talking about the combination of real world as well as simulations, but again, expressing the value of simulations in developing that technology.
There's different technology approaches to building autonomy and scaling autonomy. There's also different deployment strategies. There's the own your own network with Waymo one. There's the partner with Uber strategy, which is another. And then there's the personally owned, which we see that Waymo is very publicly talking to Toyota. But let's start with Uber, because there's this debate goes on. Waymo needs Uber, Uber needs Waymo. Dara said they're frenemies, but yet they're friends. Where do you see this going?
I think right now they view them as a very good partner in the near term, but I just don't think that over the longer term that decision has been made. And who knows how private ownership impacts that one way or another. So, I think we'll see how that evolves. I think investors are going to be very focused on every new market that gets announced. Will that be a Waymo one? Will it be Uber? There seems to be this view that all future markets will be with Uber. I think you probably shouldn't expect that. And then there's Lyft out there. Like, where is Lyft? And when does their partnership get announced? And if they don't have one, and Waymo announces multiple new markets and Lyft is not included, when do investors really start to get concerned on kind of where Lyft is with the leading technology provider of autonomy today, Waymo?
Where's Waldo or where's Lyft? That really raises the question. Now, I want to stay on in this Uber thing for a minute. If you look at Tesla with the robotaxi, they have the software, you're going to be able to operate and hail a robotaxi, be able to put your own vehicle, all using the Tesla robotaxi app. Waymo one, in theory, could add personally owned, which goes back to why the heck would Waymo need Uber? Dara will sit here and tell you demand, 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 but why?
I mean, Uber would claim it's just the demand side of it, right? And that, especially if it's a privately owned Waymo driver powering a Toyota or whatever OEMs that they have, that if that customer wants to not just use it for themselves, but generate some money out of it, that Uber's generating the most demand for them. So that's theoretically the argument, but that's, we're probably at least 5 years away from scale private ownership of a lot of these cars.
Any insights or speculation to how long these Waymo Uber deals last in these two markets? Are they multi-year?
It's hard to know, but again, going back to what Dara said on a podcast this week, I think he talked about like, look, let's get the markets established. Let's do 1 year deals. And if we have to review to see who's going to get the economics, we'll do that in the future. So I have no idea, but it sounds to me like Uber prefers to have short-term deals.
Maybe the way that Uber wins, which we've talked about on several podcasts, is fragmentation, consumer choice. Consumer could put the vehicles on there. It'll box out Waymo. So if you buy it or you license it, you could put it on the Uber network. Uber's going to get their products. They're going to get their vehicles. Could that work?
I mean, for Waymo, that's probably true because, Google is under such scrutiny by regulators for them to limit a privately owned Waymo-driven, third-party car to just the Waymo One network would be difficult. Tesla's a different beast, though, and Tesla has no interest, I think, in allowing their auto-driven cars to be in the Uber network. And furthermore, then you say, well, what about licensing it? And if someone licensed FSD to an OEM, and then that OEM would then allow that car to be put into the Uber network. No, if Tesla does license to an OEM, they will also have that same restriction where they will not permit that to be put into the Uber or Lyft network. And secondly, in terms of this licensing, I know that Elon talks about it and they're talking to OEMs, and there's certainly desperation on the OEM's standpoint, or there should be shortly, to have some type of autonomy strategy. But I think what licensing looks like from Tesla is more of like, hey, here's what we did. Here are the specifications. Here's the book on how you do FSD. Now go and do it. And I think that is a very fearful position for an OEM to enter, as opposed to let's say Nuro, who's going to work with you as the OEM, or May Mobility, who's going to have cross engineers and develop a combined, roadmap to integration. Tesla's not going to do that. They're going to say, here it is, go do it. It's on you. And when you do it, you still can't plug those cars into Uber's network. So as a result, I'm not sure that OEMs today are at that point to cut those deals. I could be wrong. Again, a note of the desperation. But if you wanted a Tesla operated car, that's probably going to take an OEM 3-4 years, given how slow they move, to deliver something like that into the market. So that does not seem like something that's appealing to an OEM to move forward. We'll see.
3 to 4 years, try 7. And if that does move forward, so you have 150,000 vehicles technically removed from the Uber network. You visited with Dave Ferguson at Nuro this week when you were in the Valley. And Nuro has openly pivoted to a licensing model. Andrew Chapman has been on the Road to Autonomy podcast, spoke about it in depth. They announced 3 new testing markets with Dallas, Miami, and San Diego. Could this Tesla, what you're discussing, potentially accelerate what Nuro's plans for an OEM deal?
I just described how challenging it might be for an OEM to take on that Tesla book. That creates an opportunity for Nuro, for May Mobility, for others, even maybe Aurora if they get their technology properly. And look, I met with Dave Ferguson first time. I had previously met with Jay-Z a couple of times. I think he's a great founder. It's compelling, right? Because the technology is a lot cheaper. And then if you're an OEM, you can fully own that and integrate that into your product. For Nuro, it's great. You're a fully licensed model. It's going to rely on, I think, a rideshare company or others to try and step in with the dollars. But I think given the dollars that are getting thrown around by Uber, I mean, they've put $100 million into WeRide, that helping this develop, which has been part of Dyer's strategy, and putting some of those cars on the road, or maybe same thing with Lyft or whoever, makes a lot of sense. So I think that's good. And I think, we'll see how Nuro progresses. They've certainly, I think, have taken the right approach. So I think good things are coming.
I would say definitely good things are coming. Any insights into when we might get a public announcement of the OEM deal?
No insights there. But again, I think, this pivot and the state of the technology today, the cost of the technology, and again, what's going on at Waymo and Tesla, I think, cue them up for something in 2025 for sure.
And what this does, we've talked about it a lot, this validates Wave strategy. It really, truly does.
I had a lunch with an industry contact in, I forget what town it was, but I mean, I saw multiple Nuros going by. I mean, they're active in the market, adding miles to their program.
They're active adding miles to the program. And to our listeners and viewers, last week, Walt and I recorded before the big news broke, Aurora. They'd had the great head fake. They had driver out commercial. We applauded it. It was well done. And then lo and behold, a demand of PACCAR and a May 19th blog post, we confirmed from Chris Urmson, posted it publicly, they had to put a driver back in. They're still gathering miles, but they're not fully driverless. There's a safety driver back in. Walt, what the heck do you think happened?
It's kind of wild. And I'm guessing that PACCAR has been pretty public in general about their focus on safety. That's definitely an unfortunate situation. And I think then puts more focus on Volvo. Challenge of Volvo is when I look at LinkedIn and just talking to people, it sounds like there's job cuts at Volvo within this space specifically, whether it's innovation labs or autonomy. So I'm wondering, not that this, stops them from moving forward, but if you're losing people that are focused on adding autonomy to the Volvo trucks, that can't help at a time when your first partner, at least PACCAR, is basically forcing you to put the driver back in the seat.
PACCAR is forced them to put it back in, and we had that there in the blog post. The other interesting telling sign for me is when Uber announced driver out, no press release, no public statement from PACCAR congratulating them. I'll go even further, no LinkedIn post, because PACCAR does not have NX. No statement, crickets. It tells me that the relationship is strained. How long do you think PACCAR could go from not allowing them to go back to driver out?
I don't have enough relationship with these companies, but I do. The more I learn about OEMs, especially in the trucking space, a bit set in their ways, perhaps. So I don't know. I mean, Kodiak has been successful in moving forward with Atlas on PACCAR trucks. So I don't want to say it's impossible. I think to your point, I think we have a great respect for the Aurora technology team, although you have to mention that there's been turnover at the top. And that was what we did cover on last week's episode, Sterling Anderson leaving to go to GM. And then on top of that, there's obviously going to be more pressure. Like going back to Google I/O, Waymo still has Class 8 on the roadmap. Is it going to be that long before something gets announced in Class 8 from Waymo? You have Kodiak, which is, they get chided for not being on a highway. Okay, so then what happens when they cut a deal? Not an announcement, but when they cut a deal for someone on the highway. How is that perceived then? So, and even Plus, I mean, unfortunately, I had a conflict. I couldn't make it down, but some of my acquaintances went down to Plus, tried out their technology, had a very positive experience in a truck and a good meeting with management team. Again, all these guys have a different type of approach. They're a little bit more OEM focused than, let's say, Kodiak is. But, there's a lot of potential noise that can exist in the market at a time when, your primary truck is now has a driver sitting in the driver's seat.
The interesting part of that, I'm going to get into the weeds here. In the statement that Mr. Urmson made in that blog post, he said, some rides had an observer in the back seat. Elon's definition, that's supervised, that's not unsupervised. Why was that not disclosed to the market when they announced this? To me, that's material.
Well, they did announce that Chris was in the back seat for those cars. I don't know if he was determined as an observer. I also want to say this is kind of a good pivot, not to go back to Waymo and Tesla, but it's definitely top of mind. Things evolve over time. Like when you think about Waymo's safety driver, we know that historically there was a guy that drew a line when it got, in a tough situation. I think with the way it currently works, Waymo driver, is that you can be driving along the road, the car notices that something's coming up, it goes to the safety driver sitting in that market and says, what should I do? And there's a click down menu, and you may be having interventions from a safety driver in your Waymo ride that you don't even know about. Now let's now move over to Tesla. I think Tesla initially, you're probably going to have someone literally driving the car, and there'll be a 1-to-1 ratio. And as that gets discovered, you're going to have the haters point that out. But it's an evolution, right? Over time, everyone's going to evolve, and you should be applauding the focus on safety for all of these guys, whether it's Aurora having someone in the back seat, the approach that Waymo has already taken, or where Tesla's starting with in terms of maybe a 1-to-1 safety driver, and then evolving as they get more comfortable to take, to take the approach that Waymo approaches. All of it is evidence of the industry's focus on safety, and we shouldn't necessarily chide them for it. Obviously fair to evaluate the technology, but I think that's, I think it's a little unfair to bash them for saying someone's in the back seat in the earliest days of their launch.
Disclose it. But with that said, Aurora does have a safety culture. Nat Buse does a fantastic job of building and leading that safety. And Nat, you do a really great job, sir. But Walt, that should have been disclosed. Another thing, why was the blog post released at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time when the market was open? Again, going from driver out to driver in, to me, seems material. It just seems that there's a series of unforced errors that are unfortunately happening time and time again at Aurora.
I mean, I can't defend some of the communication. I mean, we talked about this on past episodes, even going to the last month. Again, we're focused on Tesla having this expectation of June 1st and everything's going to happen. Meanwhile, Aurora didn't actually announce driver out until the month had passed, even though it had occurred the week before. These are just decisions that I think companies have to make. And frankly, what the focus should be on now is getting to revenue contracts and path to profitability.
At Google I/O, there were statements from Waymo about the VIA program. This comes months after their co-CEO made another public statement around it. It seems that trucking is becoming top of mind at Waymo. Furthermore, I can confirm that Waymo's quote-unquote seat in partnership with Daimler is still intact. 2027, the dual redundant Freightliner autonomous chassis is coming out. So Waymo, if they do turn it on, they have a truck. Could everything kind of be lining towards 2027 for Waymo? And if they do enter the market, what happens?
Yeah, we'll see where the market is there. That is a different market. And I think establishing some customer relationships in the interim are going to be positive for companies that can get there. You can't forget this is still Google. It's probably still going to be Google 2 years ago. So there is some concern about enabling a large tech company, given how they've disrupted other industries, which gives some of the new entrants some opportunity. But yeah, it's obviously certainly something to keep your eyes on.
The thing that I'm watching, and as this market unfolds, the Tesla Waymo, we've been going back and forth, playing ping pong with Tesla and Waymo. Tesla has they have the car business, the robotaxi business, the semi, and soon to be semi, the autonomous business. Waymo has the robotaxi, soon to have the personally owned AV, and perhaps the truck. It just seems that they're each going into each other's markets to compete, and if they do, those companies could really end up owning, I will say, 40, even 50% of this market share of autonomy across both trucks and cars if they keep going the way they're going.
I'll just relate this to my experience with Starlink, where a lot of, it started as, well, it's just going to be home broadband for someone that lives in the middle of a desert, remote locations. And then it was like, well, someone suburban can use it and maybe as a backup to broadband, which sometimes goes down because of the storms we have here. And then it was like, oh, well, and then it's also hitting the ships, and then it's hitting the RVs, and then it's hitting the boats. And when you build a good technology with connectivity and you have an existing model, there's obviously, other models or other market opportunities that you can take advantage of. The same holds true for any of these companies. Like if Aurora is successful with their technology, it can then be applied to OEMs on the car front. So sure, will Tesla go to the semis? Yeah, that's a much smaller opportunity for them, but certainly that is a long-term risk to kind of continue to be aware of. And yes, in terms of the responsiveness, Waymo went out and announced that they're talking to Toyota. There's no agreement. There's nothing. They're talking to a company. That is as red flag as it gets in terms of feeling market pressure to be able to have to say something about your future plans. Otherwise, why would you possibly announce something that's not like a full-on agreement, right? So, even though they're within this larger company, Google, well-funded, there's still pressures that they have to show progress in other areas.
They have pressures, and they have to show revenue. If you look at pressures, how much pressure do you think the Chinese robotaxi industry is under? Because it seems to me that Beijing is pushing to export this technology across the globe. And we spoke about this on many podcasts, how now I'll use the term, expanding or invading into Europe. And this week, well, you got to file this under, you can't make this up. A Pony AI robotaxi, no human, they're fully autonomous in Beijing, blew up. It caught on fire because of a system, quote unquote, malfunction. That was in the police report as reported by Reuters, a system malfunction. How the heck does a robotaxi just go biddity boppity boop and catch on fire?
It's not an Autonomy Markets podcast until we hear Grayson say biddity boppity boop. So thank you for that. It came a little late this time. We do get a lot of feedback on our podcast, and thanks for all the positive, and we're keeping you up to date with the weekly events. We're not giving you commentary on stuff that happened 3 weeks ago. And this did happen this week. And the other feedback we get is talk more about China. And some people have this belief that, whatever we talk about is irrelevant because China's so far ahead. So it was interesting to see, a setback. Everyone has setbacks. I'm sure there's, going to be continued technology developments at Pony and WeRide and Baidu and others. So that's positive. But the bigger issue here, I think, is the existing trade war. We have a new potential tariff against Apple, getting taxed 25% because they're not making their phones in the United States. There was some shift to India. It's an interesting concept because there was a book that our listeners should look at, Apple in China by Patrick McGee, that talks about how Apple has effectively created this ability for China to be very successful as a leading manufacturer across the board. And they've taken that really to the detriment maybe of the United States and other countries. And I think the risk is that they do the same thing in India, which I think is what they're hopeful on doing. So I think, I think the current administration recognizes these risks and is flexing them on Apple. So the connection here is clear, which is if they still recognize these risks and you think there's going to be some magic trade deal that Trump's going to get up there with what I said in a prior podcast and, with Zeekr and who's going to make, cars in the US and everything's going to be fine from Waymo, that feels less likely from reality.
Waymo may be fully in with Zeekr, but Waymo's fully in trouble. That's the bottom line. You have a Secretary of Transportation. He says it more than I do about the China threat. Secretary Duffy goes out there, and he did it this week again with Mr. Musk at Giga, talking about the threat of China and why we have to champion homegrown autonomous vehicle companies. In separate interviews, Mr. Duffy talked about a national autonomous vehicle framework. Mr. Musk talked about a national autonomous vehicle framework. And I'm going to go on the record here while we're going to go prediction corner. I will make a prediction. By the end of the year, 2025, we will have a framework, not necessarily voted and passed, but the language for an autonomous vehicle framework will be made public. The public will see that the Trump administration wants to usher in the autonomy economy in America. What do you think?
I mean, this is clearly a top priority for Tesla. It benefits, frankly, the entire industry. But now as they get closer to the reality of driver out and their taxi network, if they didn't think it was happening for 2 years, there wouldn't be this focus, at the company and on the regulatory front. So I think it's important. Clearly, Elon has a good relationship with the president and the administration. But more importantly, let's put all that aside. It's good for America, right? You can't, if you want our technology to advance, notwithstanding the kind of, the shots I took earlier, you have to enable these technology to be used across the country. So yeah, I think I like that prediction and given what we see Secretary Duffy doing with on the airlines and enabling autonomy like they did for Amazon in terms of drone delivery, I think that's probably a safe bet.
Autonomy is good for the economy. To our listeners and viewers, sneak peek, the Council for Economic Resilience, which I chair, will be making a very significant announcement public on Wednesday. There's big things coming for autonomy in the U.S. economy. Walt, what do we need to look for besides my big announcement on Wednesday in the autonomy markets next week?
Well, Grayson, there's one company left on my earnings card, and it's Hesai, the LiDAR company. And believe it or not, we have a conference call on Memorial Day. You're a Chinese company selling LiDARs in the U.S., and you do your earnings call on Memorial Day. That is, I think, our unforced error of the week.
It's beyond an unforced error. It's a clear understanding that you don't understand the U.S. markets. It's not good. Memorial Day is a day to respect those who have sacrificed the ultimate for America. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is vertical integration. Walt, until next week.